Now, there's only one person who can stop the war in Ukraine, and it is Xi Jinping, or so says William Hague in his column today. We can speak to him now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I mean, this is hope, is it, rather than expectation?
Well, it's not even hope, actually. It's the argument. It's why China ought to stir itself to intervene, not to intervene militarily, of course, but to intervene diplomatically, much more forcefully than it has done. And actually, today, the French president and the German chancellor are meant to be talking to Xi Jinping. So I hope this is the sort of argument they're going to put to him, because I'm really arguing, if this is a long war, it's going to rejuvenate the West, it's going to strengthen Taiwan, it's going to make Russia implode, and none of those things are in China's interests. So from China's own point of view, it ought to be doing more to bring the conflict to an end. I'm supplying the argument. I'm not expecting this to happen.
But is that the only way out of this, do you think? Because recently we've been speaking to a lot of people who have helpfully explained, well, the only way out of this is X. We spoke to Sir Roderick Lyne yesterday, who said that the only way out of this was for a revolution in Russia, was for the people of Russia to rise up against their leader. Now, that might be unlikely. It might also take a long time, which we don't necessarily have. So is that the only thing you think that can help us at this point?
Well, there are, of course, as we know from history, there are many different things that can happen to change a situation or to bring a war to an end. In theory, and of course, Sir Roderick is quite right. If there was a revolution in Russia, that would change things. It's just very unlikely. If the Ukrainians comprehensively defeated the Russians on the battlefield, they're doing very well, but to comprehensively defeat them seems like a very tall order. That would help end things. So I'm just thinking diplomatically, given those two things are not very likely, what can you do diplomatically? Some countries are trying. The point is the French president keeps phoning Putin in these valiant but evidently useless phone calls. President of Turkey is getting involved. The Israeli prime minister is going backwards and forwards. People are trying, and I'm saying, well, there's actually only one guy who's really got the leverage if he chose to use it. So, it's not the only way altogether, in theory, but it's probably the only way in practice.
I want to ask you about the comments of General Sir Chris Deverell, former head of military intelligence for Joint Forces Command, who said, "I've been against the imposition of a no-fly zone by NATO in Ukraine, believing that it would surely escalate the conflict. But Putin seems hell-bent on escalation. So the question is becoming, does NATO fight him now or fight him later?" What's the answer to that question, do you think?
The answer is no, NATO and Russia should not be fighting. That is the Third World War. It's the risk of the Third World War and of fighting between nuclear-armed great powers. That would be the most dangerous situation, actually the most dangerous situation ever in the history of the world, not since the Second World War, because of course not until the end of the Second World War did nuclear weapons exist. A war between nuclear armed powers hasn't taken place. And that's the worst thing that could happen in the history of the whole of civilization and the planet. So while there is a moral imperative to help the people of Ukraine in so many ways, the highest moral imperative on earth is to avoid nuclear war. And so I don't think it's right at all to advocate a situation where there would be direct military conflict between NATO and Russia, which appears to be what the general is advocating. So there may be more to his remarks than I've read, but they're not remarks I would support.
What have you made of the bizarre situation in the last couple of days where Russia have said that they're opening humanitarian corridors, and then for whatever reason, Ukraine have said that Russia has then shelled those humanitarian corridors and civilians have died? What in your opinion, is going on there?
Well, like a lot of things about this Russian invasion, it's either complete incompetence or it is willful lack of any humanity whatsoever. Probably some mixture of the two. They do have some record from other conflicts in Chechnya and so on of saying people can evacuate and then shelling them or putting mines in their way. This is how the Russian system operates. It's also, though, very evidently the Russian armed forces lack coordination to an extraordinary degree. But unfortunately, I think it's probably the more malign interpretation that is correct. So, as to having refugee corridors, humanitarian corridors that lead only to Russia or to Belarus, well, that was just an extraordinary thing. So, when people hope that there was a round of negotiations yesterday between Russia and Ukraine, and of course people can get their hopes up that there might be some breakthrough. When they can't even agree on that, then you can see how monumentally difficult it is to come to a negotiated way forward.
Finally, William Hague, on the issue of people coming here, refugees, that has been under scrutiny over the last 48 hours or so. There were 50 visas issued. Now the updated figure is 300. There are many more applications ongoing and completed. Priti Patel said she'd expanded the scheme, but then apparently the government said, no, that's not true. It's all a bit messy. Is our system agile enough to deal with international crises? Have you been proud of the way that we've dealt with it?
No, no and no is the answer to those questions as it stands. Of course, it's right that we have the intention of taking, I think the Prime Minister said it 200,000 refugees. But these are people in a pretty desperate situation, and other countries are doing an enormous amount when you think of more than 1 million people in Poland now. And these numbers, unless there's the negotiated breakthrough we've been talking about, these numbers are going to go up astronomically. So I do think the government needs to get a better grip on this. If I was still in government, I'd be saying, you need a meeting this morning of all the key ministers and a decision led by the Prime Minister to make this system operate in a radically different way, because this is a situation it wasn't designed for, of course, our immigration system and rules. And it is going to be important to do things much faster than the government have been able to do so far.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us this morning, William.